Ahoy there, Captain Benzie here, coming at you with another video for Eve Echoes. In today's video we're going to be taking a look at the Tech 9 battleships, a quick glance over each and every one of these. Now I know what you're thinking, hang on a second, Tech 9's still a fair distance off, and it is, but battleships require a lot of skill points invested in them. So if you're intending to fly a battleship, there's no better time than the present to get started training the skills that you're going to need in order to actually pilot one. And that's ultimately what I'm here to talk about today. We're going to have a look at the 8 battleships that become available at Tech 9, that's 2 for each of the main empires. We're going to talk about what they do and why you might choose to pilot that particular ship. I'm not going to go into any extreme depth on any of these ships, just having a basic look at what they are, what they do, and what you would need to train into, kind of a preparation for Tech 9 battleships guide. Now if you do enjoy this video, let me know by hitting like on it, sub to the channel for all things Eve Echoes, ding that notification bell to never miss an upload, and of course let me know in the comment section down below which ships and topics you want to see me cover in future videos. Now this is a very important one this time around, because there are 8 of these battleships and I would like to ultimately cover some of these before Tech 9 arrives for some of us. I would like to know which of the Tech 9 battleships is actually the one that you're most looking forward to and you want to see some information about. Now on top of that as well, if you do want to go the extra mile to support this channel, you can do so either by joining us on Patreon, which I will be revamping soon, or you can come and have a look at our Redbubble merchandise store. Some very cool t-shirts, masks, notebooks, stickers, a whole ton of stuff on there if you've ever fancied representing the Catskull Academy or the Catskull Cartel. Anyway, that all said and done then, let's jump right in to talking about the Tech 9 battleships. At Tech 9, each of the 4 main empires gain access to 2 battleships. One of these is a mainline large turret variant of a battleship, so something that uses large railguns, large cannons, or large lasers, and the other one is always a special type. This is something that's either using a secondary system like drones or missiles, or doing something completely different and unusual. We will talk about these both as we go through this. Now obviously there's going to be a fair amount to cover here. We are going to be jumping through these nice and quickly. I have in the description down below put timestamps for each of those different empires. We're going to start at the Amarr and we're going to work counterclockwise through the Caldari, the Gallente, and finish off with the Minmatar Republic. You know I like the Minmatar Republic, I like to finish with my favourites, so if there is a particular ship you want to have a look at, have a look in the timestamps down below. So the Amarr Empire is obviously going to be the Armageddon and the Apocalypse, the Caldari State will be the Scorpion and the Rokh, the Gallente Federation will be the Dominix and the Megathron, and the Minmatar Republic will be the Maelstrom and the Typhoon. So without further ado then, let's jump right in. First up then, let's have a look at the Amarr Empire and its Tech 9 battleships. So up to the battleship line we go, and up to Tech 9. First of all is of course the turret, the large turret battleship. This case it is the Apocalypse. Now when we're looking at the large turret battleships, they all share a unique trait description profile, in that they are all large weapon operation, large turret operation, so large laser, large cannon, large railgun, and battleship command. So again, if you know which one of these you want to go for, those you should be training now. Battleship command is obviously one of the first skills you should be looking at, but then train the large turret system of choice, in this case, large laser operation. Now large laser operation here on the Apocalypse gives an increase of 7.5% to both the optimal range of lasers and their tracking speed. Now this actually makes this very useful both with beams and with pulses. You get a good optimal range with beams and pulses as standard, and that increase there to the optimal range obviously affects both of those quite nicely. The optimal range of pulses though obviously is a little bit shorter. The beams do get more of a bonus from that, but then on the flip side, the pulses get a bigger bonus there from the tracking speed. So this kind of fits both of those. If you want to go for a long range build with something like the beam lasers, the optimal range helps you out on that, and the tracking speed is a nice addition that just means that if anything's at extreme range and moving across you, you are going to be able to hit it a bit better. Whereas on the other hand, if you're using pulse lasers for a more brawling kind of build, although brawling doesn't really feel like the right word when you look at the range of large pulse lasers, ultimately that extra tracking speed is a nice boost there and helps those track their targets quite nicely. 37.5% additional tracking speed is nothing to be sniffed at, and the additional optimal range there just means that you're able to engage better. Honestly, if I were fitting an Apocalypse, looking at it on paper, I do think that pulse lasers are probably going to be a little bit better than using beam lasers, but that's just on paper. I haven't had a proper chance to sit down with this one I have sat down with the Apocalypse Striker, but not the Tier 9 Apocalypse. Anyway, if we look at its fitting profile here, we've got 2 drone tubes. These can launch small, medium, or large drones. I would genuinely be fitting mediums or smalls, probably more mediums here, because large drones do really suffer against things like frigates or destroyers, and your main weapons are already going to be suffering against frigates and destroyers as well. So if we go down to the mediums, then you've got something that can actually deal with those smaller, faster targets if you're playing solo PvE. We've got a whopping 8 high slots. That's 8 laser turrets that we can fit on this for an extreme amount of damage. 3 mid slots gives us a little bit of E-war to play around with. 6 low slots means that we can tank this out considerably as well. We can get a lot of shield modules onto here, and yes, I do mean shield modules. This is definitely a ship that gets is going to be better with shields than it is with armor, simply because it has more than enough capacity to fit shields and use them comfortably, and the shields have both better resistances and better HP per second recovery. Anyway, we then have 3 of each of the rig types. That's combat rigs and engineering rigs. Defensively speaking, the Apocalypse is fairly tanky. This is actually the highest defense of the 4 of the turret battleships. Power grid as well is also very high. Again, it does need to be. It's the second highest of the power grids here. That allows us to fit onto things like Nosferatus, the pulse lasers, anything that's power grid heavy. Ultimately, what we've got here is a ship that is tanky, can fit a lot of powerful modules, and can quite comfortably get right up into the thick of things with those pulse lasers and do some real hefty damage. But the second ship then for the Amarr battleships is of course going to be the Armageddon, so let's have a look at this one. Again, unusual ship here. This does look like the Balgorn, or I suppose the Balgorn looks like the Armageddon. It reminds me a little bit of the aliens from Pitch Black with Vin Diesel. Very cool looking ship. Unusual design, very long and thin with that bullish frontal head, but it does get a fire skin, and any ship that gets a fire skin is a win in my books. Now this, as I said, is the secondary battleship type here for Amarr. This isn't the mainline turrets. This is using the Amarr's secondary weapon, which is of course drones. So again, we're using battleship command here to get an additional drone DPS, drone EHP, and drone control range. Now if we were to compare this with, spoiler alert, the Dominix, which is the other drone battleship, you'll see that ultimately we have the same drone DPS, the same drone EHP, but the Dominix I think does get additional control range. If I remember correctly, the Dominix has a 10km control range, whereas the Armageddon here only gets 6km per skill point. Now admittedly as well, with the Dominix that's from large drone operations, whereas on the Armageddon here you're getting that from battleship command, so it is a little bit easier to train into the Dominix's drone damage than it is, into the Armageddon's drone damage than it is to the Dominix, because whatever battleship you fly you're going to want to have battleship command rather than having to go all the way into drone ops, which then may not affect other weapon types. Now of course the Armageddon then, surprisingly actually, similarly to the Balgorn, gets bonuses from advanced electronic warfare. This increases the range of its energy Nosferatu and the energy neutralizer optimal range. So you're getting longer range E-War and Drain here. This makes this surprisingly good in fleet PvP because it is able to flatten enemies' capacitors using those neutralizers from quite an extensive range, and in PvE you're able to keep a Nosferatu on your opponent from further away, have a higher effective range, which when you couple that with something like your drones and some lasers on there as well, for example, means you do a surprising amount of damage and you're able to maintain your own tank, your own shields, that kind of thing, really quite nicely thanks to that Nosferatu. Now, comparative here to the Apocalypse, you'll see that we've got 4 drone tubes here. Again, these can take small, medium, or large, and this time large drones are probably a good option. I would probably go for something, actually maybe even like the Sentry drones here, drop them at range, then move the Armageddon into combat and brawl with whatever weapons you put in its high slots, whether that's lasers. Heck, you can even put missiles on this, because it doesn't get any bonus to any particular high slot weapon. Entirely up to you what you want to do with that. The control range, obviously you need to kind of stay close to your drones, but you can outrange those to a fair distance, use your Nosferatu and your neutralizer to flatten your opponents, whilst dealing damage with whatever high system you have, whilst your sentries keep their range. Now defensively, you'll see again the Armageddon here, we're looking at 73,091. That is tankier then than the Apocalypse. Very tanky battleship here. Nice high power grid. Rest of the stats here are pretty solid. The Armageddon is actually a very scary battleship because of how those drones work. In PvE with that Nosferatu as well, I can imagine this actually being a very popular choice of battleship. Moving on then to the Caldari state battleships. Again, we've got a mainline version and we've got a secondary version, but the secondary version for the Caldari is most unusual. But first of all then, let's have a look at the Rokh. This is of course the mainline turret battleship for the Caldari, and it actually looks like a railgun. I'll be completely honest, this thing looks like a floating space cannon, and when you look at its stats and its attributes and all of that, that's pretty much what it is. And in the red ochre, it just looks mean as business when it's out there. You know this thing is just going to pack an absolute wallop. If we look at its trait description, like every one of the other mainline battleships, we've got large turret operation being our main skill, with battleship command being our secondary. Now battleship command here gives us an increase to our shield resistance, which means that the Rokh takes a lot less damage than it otherwise might do, making this a surprisingly tanky battleship. I mean, heck, its defense there of 61,583 may not be the highest of the defenses across the board here for the battleships themselves. In fact, it is the lowest of the 4 turret battleships, but those shields are absolutely monstrous. That is a very high shield, highest of all of the battleships at Tech 9. Plus it gets those resistances there to the shield resistance, making it incredibly tanky from distance. You don't need to worry too much about active tanking this because you're going to take so little damage thanks to how your shields have those high resistances. The large railgun optimal range bonus that you get for large railgun operation again adds an extra 50% optimal range to your railguns. This is definitely the kind of ship you want to fit those large rifled railguns, sit at some distance and snipe things. If you've been playing around with something like the Naga and you quite enjoy that long range sniping build, then going into the Rokh is definitely a way forward. You just swap out your battle cruiser for battleship skills, and thus you have, as I said, a floating cannon in space. Surprisingly tanky with that defense. As I said, it may be lower overall in the defenses, but those shields really take one heck of a beating before they finally go down. As for the fitting profile, 2 drone tubes that fit small, medium or large drones, 8 high slots, so 8 of those large rifled railguns. Gosh, the alpha damage that can do, can you imagine? 3 mid slots, 6 low slots to fill out that tank, and 3 of each of the rig types. Again, absolutely monstrous power grid here, 10,623. This is not as small as the Megathron, but it's not as big as either the Maelstrom or the Apocalypse. It doesn't need to be, because the modules that it's fitting aren't as power grid hungry. Rest of its stats though, again, large signature radius, slow moving ship. It is what you'd expect from a battleship. Tanky as all heck, very good at outranging things, and doing some serious damage from a distance. But the secondary ship here for the Caldari state is the Scorpion, and this is one heck of an enigmatic vessel. Again, it has the fire skin, and I love any ship that gets the fire skin. They are just cool. I love the gunmetal grey with that red detailing. But if we look at the trait description here for the Scorpion, this is an incredibly unusual battleship. I did fly one of these back in the final test. I loved it. I never got around to making a video on it, sadly. One I would like to do a video on soon, so do expect the Scorpion probably to be one of the Tech 9 battleships that I do cover before we start reaching Tech 9. Now, whereas most of the other battleships, the secondary battleships, use their secondary weapon system, like for example the Typhoon uses missiles and the Dominix uses drones, here you'll see the Scorpion actually doesn't have either. It's not, you'd expect it to be missiles, but that's not the case. In fact, if we look at the battleship command bonus, we get a bonus here to plus 15% missile torpedo damage, which is what you'd expect, but we also get plus 15% turret damage. That is an incredibly vague skill. That applies to anything, whether it is a small turret, a medium turret, or a large turret. So if you want to put medium lasers on there, you're getting 15% increased turret damage. If you want to put large decomposers on here, oh yes, you theoretically could. Obviously, if there was any way to get large decomposers in the game right now, you can get additional damage to those, whether it's lasers, railguns, cannons, or decomposers. All of those count as turrets, and it doesn't specify here between small, medium, or large, whichever weapon system you want to use. This means if you want to use missiles, absolutely go ahead, you get the additional bonuses for those. If you want to use large strike cannons, for example, for their massive range, then 100% you can do that. If you fancy using medium autocannons because you want something with very high tracking, or medium snub-nosed railguns, for example, yes, again, you can go ahead and do that. The Scorpion is an incredibly versatile battleship for that. What makes this interesting though is its advanced electronic warfare bonus. This is an E-War battleship. Plus 10% guidance disruption strength, plus 10% guidance disruption optimal range, and plus 5 scan resolution. This thing can lock on quickly to targets, it can hit them with those guidance disruptors, and absolutely ruin a missile user's day. This means that you are going to quite comfortably outrange most missile ships out there, even other missile battleships, thanks to how your guidance disruptors are going to just be messing with their systems. And with 4 mid slots, you can be sure that you're definitely going to have enough space to at least fit 1, maybe 2, possibly even 3 guidance disruptors into those slots, and just really ruin someone's day. Now, looking at the rest of the fitting profile, again, we've got 2 drone tubes, small, medium, or large drones can fit into that, 5 top slots, which can be anything you like, and you're going to get bonuses to the whatever you like. Those 4 mid slots, 5 low slots, which gives us a good amount of tank or versatility. Not quite as much as some of the others, perhaps, but it is still very solid, along with 3 of each of the rig types. Now, defensively here, again, this is much more defensive than the Rokh. It's actually more defensive than most of the turrets, most of the other turret battleships, but if we then compare that to things like the Armageddon, the Dominix, and the Typhoon, again, it is on the lighter end of things. So this is a middling battleship, defensively speaking. Very, very good. Still going to take a heck of a beating on those shields before it goes down. Big ship, very slow, exactly what you'd expect from a battleship. This is probably the most unusual one, and I know a lot of you folks in my comment section are big fans of the Scorpion. I mean, who wouldn't be a fan of a ship that literally looks like its name? It is a flying space tank in the shape of a Scorpion, and what a beast this thing can be. The Gallente Federation, in my opinion, gets some of the best looking battleships in the game. Certainly, the first we're going to look at is the Megathron, and this is actually one of my favourite looking hulls in the entirety of the EVE universe. Just check that split hull design. This is one of the most iconic designs in the EVE universe. That big curving bow to the front, it looks like it means business, and that's before we put the titanium silver skin on. Get that jet black, the slate grey, and the bright orange detailing. That is a mean looking ship that is the stuff of nightmares. Now, if we check out the trait description here, this of course is the large turret battleship for the Gallente Federation. Large railgun operation is our main skill, with battleship command as our secondary. Now, battleship command gives us a reduction to our inertia modifier. Inertia modifier obviously is the statistic that implies how quickly you can accelerate and decelerate, how quickly you can align to a new target, and thus how well you can orbit something, how you can maintain a nice sharp orbit around something. Combine this with the fact that the large railgun operation bonus here is a reduction to activation time and an increase to tracking speed. This seems clearly aimed at using large snub-nosed railguns, and those are some of the highest DPS turrets in the entire game. Now, interestingly, when we look at the Megathron and have a look at its attributes and fittings profile here, you see it's got 2 drone tubes that can launch small, medium, or large drones, 3 mid slots, 6 low slots, 3 of each of the rigs, but only 7 of the high slots. Now, if we look at the Rokh, at the Apocalypse and the Maelstrom, those all have 8 high slots, whereas the Megathron for some reason only gets 7. And I have to assume that this is intentional, not only because that's how it was back in the open beta test and the final test, but also because we had changes to some of the Tech 9 battleships in the October-November update, and this remained the same. So I have to assume that's because of the absolutely crazy amount of DPS that this can kick out, thanks to using snub-nosed railguns and having that faster firing time. Now, that does mean that if you're a railgun pilot and you're wanting to use the optimal range bonuses of the Rokh for large rifled railguns, that's the way you're going to have to go. Large rifled railguns are definitely a thing for the Rokh. You're not getting much in the way of bonuses at all here on the Megathron. That's not to say that you can't fit large rifled railguns on a Megathron. You can, I just don't really see the point. If you're going to get the Megathron, lean into its bonuses, fit the large snub-nosed, and melt anything that they can comfortably track. Now, when I say comfortably track, obviously these are large snub-nosed railguns. They do have a fast tracking speed for large turrets, but being large turrets, that is still very slow comparative to others. This means that those mid-slots, the drones there, I would probably stick with medium drones there, just to make sure you can actually do some kind of damage to frigates and destroyers, and you can actually track those. Otherwise, we're fairly tanky, 63,731 on the defensive, with a decent inertia, as you can see down here, very low inertia to start with, and actually a fairly low mass comparative to some of the other battleships out there. Very low mass of 98.4 makes this surprisingly nimble, which again helps us maintain the optimal range there with those snub-nosed railguns. Now, the secondary ship for the Gallente Federation is, of course, the Dominix, and of course, the Gallente secondary weapon is drones. I expect the Dominix will be one of the most popular battleships at Tech 9, so if you're looking to make any of the battleships, the Dominix is the one I would be starting to prepare to make. These are the ones that everyone is going to want, and I would be remiss for not pointing out Gallente did an absolutely fantastic fitting guide on the Dominix, where he showcases how you can fit it, how you can utilise this absolutely brutal ship. Drones, of course, are ever popular in PvE, and the Dominix is an absolute badass at it. And talking about badass, again, we have the fire skin. Why do the battleships get all the cool skins? That fire skin just looks absolutely lit, pun wholeheartedly intended. Now, of course, the other drone battleship at Tech 9 is the Armageddon, so there's going to be parallels drawn between the Armageddon and the Dominix, and whereas the Armageddon gets bonuses to Nosferatus and neutralizers, the Dominix is purely based around those drones. This means that the Armageddon gets a 40% drone DPS, 5% drone EHP, and a 6 km control range, whereas here the Dominix still gets that 40% drone DPS, but also gets optimal range and tracking speed bonuses, which means those drones are able to apply that damage a lot better to their target. The 10 km drone control range rather than the 6 km is again the difference between 30 km additional range and 50 km. This is a long range drone ship. We also get 5 drone tubes here that can launch small, medium, or large drones, and you can get away quite nicely here with dropping 5 massively powerful sentry drones at range, moving the Dominix a little bit closer and then hitting them with missiles or strike cannons or whatever the heck you fancy, because there are no direct high slot bonuses on the ship here at all. You don't have to worry about what you put in the high slot. You can put whatever the heck you might happen to have trained, or just whatever suits your needs at the time. Excellently versatile ship here. I will leave it to Gallente. I've put a link in the description below, and it should have shown up on screen a moment ago, to his excellent video. If the Dominix is something you are interested in, if you're looking towards large drones as your battleship of choice, the Dominix is absolutely insane. I would argue that the Armageddon gets those nice bonuses there to its neutralizers and Nosferatus, which just help it a little bit in regards to its tank, thanks to keeping its own capacitor topped up. Plus, it can use those neutralizers in PvP, so for a PvP drone ship, I think the Armageddon probably does come away, but the Dominix definitely is the dominant of the two there in regards to the damage, thanks to the additional drone tube there. 5 drones rather than just 4, which is a 25% increase in DPS on its own. Before we look at the skill bonuses and stuff like that, it's a madly good ship. Last, but by absolutely no means least then, in fact I would argue saving the best for last, we have the Minmatar Republic. Now, interestingly enough, the battleships we get for the Minmatar Republic aren't my favourite looking ships. Those do actually fall into the Gallente. My absolute favourite battleship is the Tempest, but that's tech level 10 and thus outside of the remit of this video. Now, first of all then, for the large turret battleships here, we have the Maelstrom. This absolute unit of a ship, again, very cool design. I love the look of this hull. It's just not up there amongst my favourites. I find the fins a little bit weird, but I do love the fact that this thing is like an arrow flying through space, and you just know again that that means business. Unusual choice of the skin though, I'll be honest. The smoke grey skins just don't do it for me, and as a Minmatar pilot, that does actually depress me a little teeny tiny bit. Anyway, trait descriptions. Of course, this being a large turret ship, we're getting large cannon operation and battleship command, and battleship command this time gives us a 7.5% increase to shield booster amount. That is a very powerful skill. This is actually, when we look at its defenses, you'll see this is one of the most tanky of the turret battleships to start with, plus the fact that you're getting 37.5 additional shield boost every activation means this thing stays alive like you would not believe. This is as tanky as they get, and arguably tankier even than the Rokh. Okay, the Rokh does get the advantage of the longer range from its optimal range bonuses, whereas here large cannon operations on the Maelstrom does suggest large cannon activation time, which leans us more towards auto cannons than strike cannons. You can fit strike cannons on here quite comfortably. I just think that this is going to be one that large auto cannons do really well on, thanks to that lower activation time. Park this in the middle of an enemy fleet, lock them down with whatever webs and other tackle that your friends have, and then just open fire with those auto cannons, firing 25% faster, whilst you sit there with your shield booster cycling quite happily, keeping you alive through the thick of it. Very tanky ship. If we look then at its fitting profile here, we've got 2 drone tubes, small, medium or large. 8 high slots, 3 mid slots, 6 low slots, and 3 of each of the rigs. Those 8 large autocannons, just 8 large autocannons. Every time I say that, it just makes me like cringe with happiness. That is a lot of DPS, decent tracking, and a very fast rate of firepower. This is an absolute hailstorm ship. If you're the kind of person who likes to use a Gatling gun in any game that you can get a hands on one, then the Maelstrom is kind of the equivalent. This is almost like it's a poor man's Macarial by any stretch. And when I say poor man's, I don't mean that it's terrible, not at all. It's obviously not a Macarial, but it costs hardly anything by comparison, and it's going to do a good, scary amount of damage. Very useful in PvE. I think the Maelstrom is probably the one a lot of people will sleep on. Obviously the Dominix I think is going to be the most popular of all of the Tech 9 battleships, but the Maelstrom is the one I think people are going to be sleeping on. This is an absolute unit of a ship, very high defenses, very hard to kill thanks to those shield boost bonuses, and the amount of damage that this thing is going to be able to kick out with those autocannons is monstrous. Now, the other one then, of course, is the Typhoon. This is their secondary battleship, and the Minmatar's secondary weapon is, of course, missiles. So, if you're a missile pilot, you're going to be coming across to Minmatar for your battleship once you hit Tech level 9. You'll notice that there is no missile battleship for the Caldari yet. The Raven and the Raven Striker both come in at Tech 10. Anyway, Typhoon, interesting looking hull. I do quite like the look of this one. It looks like an absolute battering ram, and again it gets the fire skin, and actually I love how the fire skin looks on this one. The fact that it's almost entirely there at the front, but with that sort of tribal dark grey at the back there. Oh, very cool. Why are the battleships getting the coolest looking skills when I have the least interest in flying battleships? They're too slow for me. Trait description here for the Typhoon though, we are looking at large missile torpedo operation, we're getting a reduction to the activation time, and an increase to the explosion velocity. This actually works really well either with missiles, with rapids, and with torpedoes. If you're going up against, if you're in a siege for example and you need to take down an opponent's citadel, a Typhoon fitted with large torpedoes is absolutely monstrous, and it can hit ships surprisingly smaller than itself thanks to that explosion velocity bonus. Also Battleship Command there, giving it an increase to its scan resolution, does help it lock onto targets quicker. For PvE though, you may decide that you want to choose to go for large rapid missiles so that you can do an absolutely obscene amount of damage to other cruisers, battle cruisers, and actually still somewhat do some damage towards the frigates and the destroyers. Now, once you start looking at the fitting profile, again, we've got 2 drone tubes. Those can launch small, medium, or large. I would go for mediums or smalls if you're going into PvE, so that you've got something that can take out those frigates and destroyers comfortably. The 7 high slots are, of course, all going to be missiles. 7 large missile launchers, 7 large torpedoes, 7 large rapid launchers. That's just, I flew one of these back in the final test, and I did do a video on that. Things have changed slightly. I would check that out if you're interested. Again, I'll put a link up at the top right now. I actually quite enjoyed flying the Typhoon. It's way too slow for my tastes. It's not the kind of thing I'm ever going to fly on live, but it was fun to do a video on, and it's one I may do again. Now, 3 mid slots, 6 low slots for extra tank, and 3 of each of the rigs. Power grid is pretty good. It's enough to fit missiles quite comfortably on there. Defensively speaking as well, this is on the tankier end of things. This is right up there with the Armageddon and the Dominix as some of the most tanky of the Tech 9 battleships. This can take an absolute beating. It's got good sized shields with decent starting resistances, and because you're going to be probably keeping at range most of the time if you're using large missiles or large rapids, you can actually get away with this will take a surprising amount of firepower in. I really enjoy the Typhoon, and again, I think this is going to be a popular one. I think the Dominix is going to be the most popular, the Typhoon will be second most popular, and the Maelstrom is the one that people just won't fly, but really should. Now, of course, there's more to flying battleships than just the ships themselves. There is, of course, the skills. That's why I ultimately put this video together, to give you an idea of what the ships are like once we hit the Tech 9 battleships, and maybe give you an idea of which one, if any of them, you may be interested in flying. Because if you're interested in flying one of these, you are going to have to start skilling into it early. Battleship skills are expensive, and they take a lot of skill points to master. This means that ultimately, if you've been looking at one of these battleships and think, oh, actually, I quite like that one, the first thing you want to do is, of course, get Battleship Command all the way up to level 5. Don't skimp out and stop at 4, get that to 5, because those bonuses are really useful. They may only look like things like scan resolution or inertia modifier, but they really do help the battleship out. Secondarily then, find whichever other the secondary skill is going to be, whether it's Advanced E-War for the Scorpion or the Armageddon, large drones for the Dominix, or large turrets, whichever large turret operation it is for something like the Rokh or the Maelstrom, that kind of thing. You can have a look and decide which of those skills you want to go for next. Now, once you've got basically the skills that are listed on the ship's page done, that's when you move straight away into engineering. Battleship engineering is a vital skill that is going to allow you to fit higher tier modules thanks to it increasing the power grid, and it's going to make your capacitor bigger so that you're actually able to run those modules for longer. I would seriously consider not flying anything until at least you've got those 3 skills all up to basic 5, and then start looking into flying into advanced skills. That's when ultimately you want to have at least those 3 skills done by time you hit tech level 9, then hopefully you can jump straight into your battleship of choice. Now, at the time of me making this video, it's still a couple of weeks or months for any of us, depending obviously when you started playing, whether you're at Cognitive Neuroscience 1, 2 or 3 on your chip levels, and whether or not you've been Alpha or Omega for a certain length of time, that kind of thing. It's a long way off yet, but it certainly pays to plan ahead. Now, of course, let me know your thoughts and opinions as well. This video has just been my thoughts and opinions. As I said, ultimately, I think the Dominix is going to be the most popular of these battleships. A lot of people are going to be wanting to fly and flying around in Dominixes. The Typhoon, I think, will be the secondary, being its a missile ship, and then finally, I think the Maelstrom is my personal favourite as the one that I think a lot of people should be flying, but will probably be sleeping on. I think this is one of the better of those out there. I think the Dominix obviously will be one of the best, simply because it's a powerful drone ship, but the Maelstrom as well, I think, is one of those that's going to be surprisingly cheap comparatively, because no one will be flying them, and the modules tend to be cheaper as well than drones, etc. But I think it's going to be an absolutely amazing ship. I will do a video on it at some point close to the time. Let me know which of these ships you want to see me look at in more detail as well. We've got 8 of these to cover. I can't guarantee I'll manage all 8 before we start hitting tech level 9, but I will try and have a look at them. Anyway, folks, thank you for watching right the way to the end. Happy sailing, and see you in New Eden!